have talked about metahistoric forces. By that, I mean forces outside the scope of the understanding of your historians that have in fact had an effect on history. And in this I don't actually include, say, the Anu or the Nomo or others who visited this world and meddled, because if your historians weren't idiots, they could find those things. I speak more of the things that had a meta-influence, the things that in some cases are told but only as myth. So, for instance, the gods, the one true God, the goddess, these are forces that historians speak of as humans acting out their own particular fantasies or expressing their own particular will and simply attributing it to a god. It ain't so. There have been people acting behind the scenes, others acting behind the scenes, for longer than there have been humans, claiming to be gods or devils and manipulating people. I have seen them in this lifetime. The entity Fox that came to the little boy that I worked with out in California. The many things that I've personally worked with. Those who channel. It's easy again for a historian to say someone who is so-called channeling information like Conversations with God, Neil Donald Walsh, that they're just tapping a creative part of their unconscious and expressing it as if it were an individual identity. But folks like Neil and Joie de Dieu and Ron Roth and others, I have seen them and felt them change and become something powerful that they weren't moments before, and they weren't as soon as they stopped channeling. I have had things from that difficult to understand area attack me and nearly kill me on multiple occasions. It's something that for me and for anybody who's shamanically trained, a very real thing. And if it can be real for a single individual, whether it's Neil Donald Walsh or the boy who was channeling Fox or Ron Roth or Joie de Dieu, if it can be effective, that is, have an effect on the life of a single person. And some, like Neil Donald Walsh and the book he's written, or the books Ron Roth and Joie de Dieu, who work with others, in having an effect on them, it's having an effect on hundreds or thousands, or in some cases hundreds of thousands of others. My suggestion to you is these forces have been working for longer than there have been humans, either to help or to harm. Dark things that only care about hunting and destroying. Things of light or awareness that work to teach and guide. These things have been out there. One of those things And while this is a more physical and less metaphysical, because any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic, I put this in the meta category, and that is the May. Little devices so far beyond human comprehension, they were effectively magic that taught human civilizations and plumbing and how to make cement and arches and aqueducts and Greek culture and democracy and so on. That they have moved through history, guiding culture after culture, place after place. The May, they're a bit like a handheld computer, like your cell phone. Just a little higher tech. Oh, perhaps the size of a softball. That these computers have a vast amount of knowledge of history and society. They've led to, for the Romans, the development of concrete and the processes of the Roman legions and the hierarchical order. For the Greeks, it taught them of many things, including forms of government and mathematics and science. And I've talked about them before, so I just mentioned them to include them in the list. However, I sensed something this morning, this afternoon. And it has the same feel across different places of history, which nothing should have. In that for me the feel is the energy signature of whatever is creating it. So the only way it could have the same feel across 100,000 years of history is if it were the same entity across 100,000 years of history. And if so, then this is another one of the meta forces meddling with humanity. Now, obviously, one of those metaphors is me. In that I have lived through all those times and had an effect on all those times. And in those times that I have lived through, I have touched the dreams of the people around me. Not always as strongly as I do. My guess is in many lifetimes it was only within a particular radius. But if I lived in a city, I could affect the dreams of the people in that city and thus create a whole group of independent thinkers or people seeking change. And then, of course, the stuff I've talked to you about, the harder to believe stuff perhaps, if any of it is really easy to believe, but the harder to believe stuff about my traveling through time and intentionally meddling. Now, I encourage you to think for a moment of the Spanish Inquisition. Not the Monty Python version, which is cute and silly and thus horrible. Think of the tools developed for torture. Just astounding creativity and horror put in to violently, repeatedly rape and torture a person until they died. And the claim was that they were serving some higher end. In this case, they were fighting, I don't know, witchcraft or some bullshit. But what they did was to grab off the streets, imprison, systematically torture for information and then kill over 1 million people. I think it's actually quite a bit larger than that, over a period of 300 years. Now this is a pretty radical thing, but what I want you to realize is it's not the only time like this in history. I'll point out a couple more and you can find more on your own if you wish. But think of the French Revolution. Right? Now they created a whole new calendar and a whole new set of rituals, and they were very concerned about anybody who was following the old calendar, the old rituals, who was secretly a supporter. So unlike, well, there's no such thing really as a peaceful revolution, but unlike many of the more peaceful revolutions, the French one was horrible. It was known for dragging people off the streets, individuals, whole families, whole groups, throwing them in prison, torturing them in creative ways to get them to name names, and then killing them and mocking and playing with the bodies. All of the same features of the Inquisition. And if you are able to look below the surface to the structure, you'll see that the French Revolution has the same underneath it feeling, the same energy signature as the Inquisition. And jump to another place that's not so far back in history, and that is Stalin. In the huge Stalinist purges, where he killed an astounding number, millions of his own citizens. And he didn't go through and blow up cities, right? Just killing a lot of people in some quick and dirty way. He had a core of sneaks, just like the French Revolution or the Inquisition, that would go through and watch people and then grab them off the street and imprison them and torture them, often in creative and horrible ways, in order to get them to name names. The idea was, if they were a sympathizer for some counter-movement or an opposition to the Stalinist bullshit, that they would know others, so if you torture them long enough, they would name names. Just like in the French Revolution or the Inquisition. And again, I just picked a couple of examples that are common knowledge. And I want you to take a look at them and see that at the surface level, they are effectively the same. An oppressive regime creating a reign of terror where all of the citizens, the people, are terrified that any moment they could be grabbed and tortured and lose everything. The structural level, the group of people had something in common. For the Inquisition, it was women who had power in society, or women who had special knowledge, people who worked with the meta, or in some cases men who were sympathizers with those women. Right? It was not all women who were tortured, but there were people of power, people who could make a difference. Now think of the French Revolution. It was the aristocrats, the ones who were wealthy, the ones who had power, the ones who were well educated. Think of Stalin. It was the poets, the free thinkers, the philosophers, the people of power, though in this case, many of them were the power to change the minds of the people rather than strictly the power to rule. And just to toss one more in there, because, you're already thinking it, and it seems wrong to leave it out, and that is the Nazi purges. They give you ideas that they were cleaning up the ingrates in society, the people who nobody would miss. But in fact, many of the Jews who were taken were the wealthiest and most powerful, because they were wealthy and lent money to people. They could decide what business succeeded and what failed. They were people of great power. As well, the gypsies, people of power in the meta, who have the power to change things, just like in the Spanish Inquisition, the witches and the backwoods women, and people with knowledge of the meta. In Stalin, everybody who was religious or showed any potential in the meta was kidnapped and imprisoned and tortured and forced to name names and killed. Right? The French Revolution, they changed the names of the days and the months to remove the old gods, to make it completely free of the meta. And anyone who showed any inclination towards the meta, even the posers, were tortured, forced to name names, and killed. Now I can find lots more like these in history. Right? But at the surface level, there's similarity. At the structural level, they're identical. And if you can get down to a deep enough level to sense the energy signature under the structure, it's the same signature. I don't want to say conclusion, that's too lame. My declaration, my sense of certainty here is that there is something, whether an individual or a small group, who have been watching this world for perhaps 100,000 years, that they have periodically been driven to action by something, and decided that there was someone or something, probably a worker in the meta, a person of power, a person with the ability to influence others, who was dangerous. And they woke up a core of people to track that person down, to kidnap people, to torture them, to force them to name names, to find this person, this someone, and give them up. Right? This is my conclusion. And compared to some of the other stuff I've said, it's not that radical. But if there is something that lives longer than humans, that's been around for 50 or 100,000 years, been looking for something human, or at least something that looks human, and that is having an influence on the people that this something, this force X, doesn't approve of. Right? So there is something human, or that looks human, affecting the world, involved in the meta, creating free thinkers, and that is marked as dangerous. So dangerous that they don't just hunt down the one person. They create organizations that torture and kill literally millions of people. Even in the Middle Ages, where cities didn't have millions of people, they managed to track down and torture and kill millions. Does it seem at all strange to you that there would be such a force, that it would do such a thing? And what's interesting is if they do think it's a human lifespan is at the outside 100, 110 years. Right? And the Inquisition went on for 300 years. Which means they are capturing, torturing humans to get them to name other humans, and killing humans. But it went on for 300 years. No human lives that long. Right? So the implication is there is some sort of dark force, this force X, that's watching, it's looking for someone or some small group who has the ability to influence people and wake them up, who has an understanding and ability to shape the meta, who has knowledge and power in the physical world, and who lives forever. Because it went on for 300 years. But it's also gone on in many other places in the world. The things Japan has done to China, the things China has done to her own people. Some of the lesser known Muslim purges, called purges of heresy, but they have the same energy signature. Right? Went on for hundreds of years just in the Spanish Inquisition, but it continued in all these other places, and it had existed a long time before. So this Force X is seeking someone or some small group who looks human, who has power in the world, has meta potential or meta power, has the ability to influence and awaken people, and who lives forever. They're looking for Constantine. Whoever they are, they're looking for Constantine. Now, they may not know what Constantine is, but they recognize that there is this powerful force, that it shows up in all these different places, and it's always got the same message. No matter where in history, it shows up and it starts teaching people. It starts waking them up. I feel it's probably speaking to them in dreams and waking them up, causing them to think up new ideas, like, the Protestant Reformation. Or some of the brilliant ideas that were coming up when Northern Africa, the Arabs, were in southern Spain. Castile was in northern Spain, and between them there was this incredible renaissance of free thinking and awareness and beauty coming up that was undermining the power of the Catholic Church at the time. And making some beautiful, beautiful, amazing things. Much of it had to be kept secret because of the power of the church. But I'll point out to you one that I showed you recently in a TED Talk, and that was Master Giorgini's TED Talk, about how the Quixote, the Don Quixote, was the ichthys fish, carrying the secret message, the hidden knowledge that people wanted to learn. Right? This kind of knowledge was waking up there, and people were trying to express it, and so the Inquisition was created to destroy it. Now, the only force I know that has existed throughout history, having these effects, that is meta potential, waking people up from their dreams and causing them to create beauty and light, creating meta potential and having a great meta potential to shape and change the underlying energies, is me. And though I have had many different lifetimes, you could torture me and kill me in any lifetime, and it's happened a lot. Many of the lifetimes I've remembered, I've died under torture or horribly. I will simply come back in the next lifetime, and even if I don't remember who I am, I will embody the same things, hold the same energies, and anchor those energies into the world. Right? So if this place in southern Spain where Castile was meeting the North African influence was as important as I think it is, then having been killed in the Inquisition, I would just be born in another body and grow up again. But even as a small child, I would be anchoring those energies in and feeding those changes in the world. And so, to an observer who doesn't understand that it doesn't take a sentient, aware adult who's been around for 100,000 years, all they're seeing is the effect. We found all these people, we thought we had the right ones, we tortured them, they gave up names, we killed them, and yet still there's this influence in the background affecting people, waking them up, creating this instability, destroying this pit of shadow we've created and bringing in light. Therefore, whatever's doing it is still out there. So the Inquisition continues. And it did continue until who I was in that time was no longer interested in that area and left and began to work in other areas in the world, and then the Inquisition just petered out. I'll point out that one of the most memorable metaphoric stories of the modern era, Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, one of the most fascinating metaphorical stories of change, and it is set in exactly that dynamic. Southern Castile, the south of Spain, interacting with the Moors. And when the boy goes on his pilgrimage, then he takes whatever he's learned from or gotten from Europe and then cross that border, the straits, into Africa, and sought his way across the desert and into Egypt. And thus woven together those three powerful centers that is Southern Europe, the center of much learning; Northern Africa, a powerful center of magic, the way the desert has been eating the heart out of it and forcing the magic further and further towards the coasts, so that those places have held more and more of that magic. And then Egypt, which has been an ancient and powerful center. But it starts in that same era, in that same area, in the Inquisition. And there's a reason it's so powerful, because that was a powerful time. Alright, so all of that stuff said, maybe it's entertaining, and maybe it's distracting, and maybe it's just noise. All of that stuff said, my conclusion is there is a dark force. I've just called it Force X because I'm weak and tired and lazy at the moment. There is a dark force that has existed for 100,000 years, maybe more, that has been trying to wipe out the Constantine force that is my work in the world. And that many times it has succeeded in imprisoning me and torturing me and killing me. But since they're expecting Constantine to be someone who does live forever, they're still frustrated having never found me. And for those who are given to cool stories and don't care about details, just think of this as a really cool story. This is the kind of thing that Roger Zelazny could have done justice to if he had the way with words that Tom Robin does. And maybe just a tiny bit of the sort of epic across millennia of time, across eons of time, storytelling of, say, James Michener. Right? Those three authors in those three roles, if they wrote a story of good versus evil across the millennia, perhaps even with certain elements of the sort of Tolkien, light versus shadow, good versus evil. If they wrote something, they could write a story like this. And if you like stories, just think of it as that. This is an amazing story. This is an epic saga that makes Star Wars look like, I don't know, Prince on a baby's diaper. You know, the little happy faces they put on babies' diapers to make them more fun for mommy. That kind of primitive, cheesy stuff in the face of this, the scope, the magnitude, the power and beauty that this story would contain. So just consider it a story. For those of you who can sense or scan either one, I encourage you to scan this. For those whose ability with the energies is good enough, I encourage you to find the energy signature, not under the Inquisition itself, but to assume for a moment that the Inquisition was engendered by a single entity or small group, and find the energy signature of that entity or small group, and compare it to the French Revolution, the Stalinist purges, the Europeans invading North and South America and torturing and killing insane numbers of the natives and lots of other things. Find that signature and recognize that it is the same signature. And if you can't sense and can't scan and don't like good stories, then you probably shouldn't be listening to this, because this is too crazy to be true. Just letting you know. Every scientist or historian in your world will tell you this is insanity, and a psychologist would call me a bunch of names straight out of the DSM-4. I have been influencing your world in two ways. That is being born lifetime after lifetime after lifetime with no space in between. Unlike the rest of you, I don't go back to an in-between place that is far more alive and recover who I am and heal. As soon as one life ends, I'm entering another, and another, and another. And this has been true since I died here 150,000 plus years ago. And every single time I have held the energies that I hold now. And not once did I hold them myself as a shining lighthouse kind of thing. Because then, whatever's looking would just find me and kill me. But rather, I have held it deep within, in a place that can't be easily perceived. The reason that many of your people look at me now and say, he doesn't look amazing, he doesn't look like an angel, he doesn't look exceptional, he's just an ordinary guy. Because I have kept this hidden deep inside, lest I be tortured and killed as soon as I came on the scene. And from that deep inside place, I have woven it into the planets. I have woven it into the dreams of the people. I have woven it into the cultures and the histories, into the physical phylogeny, into the socio-cultural phylogeny, into the mythopoetical phylogeny of the human species. Wow. I sound a bit like Terence McKenna or one of these guys who's really good with words when I talk like that. It's kind of nice. I should listen to myself sometimes and say, wow, I sound like one of the smart guys. That's cool. But I rarely listen to myself. Well, I'd get distracted. Lifetime after lifetime after lifetime for over 150,000 years, I have been born and lived and died again and again and again. Often as someone poor. Not always as one of the obvious good guys. I have been an assassin. I have been a soldier. I have fought, I have killed, I have died. I have been a teacher and a healer and a monk and many things. And it didn't matter as much what I did, only that I was there. And being there, not as an observer, but eating the food of the time, eating the energies of the world, and being woven into the meat of the world. I was part of the organism. And as part of the organism, I was bringing that energy in and changing things. Now the second way is the whole Time Lord mythos, the Doctor, that I have, mostly in the last 10 years, been jumping back in time and influencing critical moments. The fall of Constantinople, the beginning of the Roman Empire, the removal of the Maeve from Cairo, the beginning of the Dark Ages, the Renaissance, the rise of Protestantism and the fall of the Catholic Church, the whole World War II experience, that I have gone back and meddled with key figures in moments of time. I have reached into their dreams. I have talked to them. I have shown up. For them, it's as if I showed up in their bedroom and talked to them. though they were dreaming, so I just spoke in their dreams. But in that just before you wake dreaming space, it's very easy. And they see you just walking into their bedroom trying to figure out how you got there. There's a wonderful Doctor Who episode that kind of shows what that might look like from a human perspective. Minus the preposterous clockwork dolls. But it's the Brits, and they're really, really bad at entertainment, so we'll excuse the clockwork dolls. I have been going back, perhaps as early as that which ended the dinosaurs. Perhaps earlier. In delicately touching things throughout the entirety of the human history. And unlike the silly mythoi or mythi that you people are convinced that every time you make a change you create parallel worlds, and there are millions of parallel worlds all bouncing all over and they're totally independent. This nonsense. I have spoken about how time works. Like over a vast scope, the synapses in the brain. There's a recording on this. When I make a change, it doesn't spin off a new world. It simply changes the history of this one. And while there may be shades or reflections, they are potentialities, and it's an incredibly stable potentiality. I could in fact go back in time and kill my own grandfather, the stupid grandfather paradox that time travel arguers use. And it wouldn't matter, because time is an astoundingly stable field. Not a timeline, it's a field. And making one change is just immediately balanced by another. Right? It's like going fishing and catching a fish. The population of fish in the sea is not dramatically changed by it. So making changes, even ones that seem kind of radically, impressively large, don't. Making changes in the timeline doesn't destroy it. It's not a fragile thing. It doesn't spin off alternatives. So I can go back in time or forward in times and weave things and create these points between now or near future and the past that creates a sort of like a guitar string that will resonate between the two places and carry that energy from now back to then and vice versa. And create this vast stability as it's transforming. The only reason I haven't done this before is because time is so stable. It would have taken me vast amounts of energy to make any changes. I had to wait till now, when humans are on the brink of destroying themselves, when the world faces complete, not just economic, but geological collapse. Possible meta or mega extinction of a vast number of species till, the cockroaches are left with the burned out cities kind of thing. I had to wait until the world was in this level of chaos, because mathematically speaking, a system changes with the least amount of input the closer it gets to the edge of complete chaos. And so I have been making these changes, both by living the lifetimes and by jumping across. And to the outside observer, whoever this mythical force X is, all it knows is that something has been existing for as long as it's been watching. And that something is opposing the shadow. That something is creating light. That something is creating change. And it's not in control. Right? It feels it should have a degree of control, and it's not. And this thing of shadow, fearing the loss of control, has created purges of inconceivably horrifying scope throughout the entire history of the human race. It's not recent. It was in the time of the Aztecs. It was when children were sacrificed to the owl god. It was much further back even than that. this force has been watching and creating purges on larger and larger and larger scale. Up to, in recent years, say the Nazis or the Stalinist purges, or some of the great so-called ethnic cleansing purges going on right now. And if you're still with me and you're not convinced I'm completely crazy, or if you're with me and you're convinced I'm crazy but you're just curious, you're probably wondering, what is this Force X? I was. And I went looking because I felt at first it might be one of the May. These sort of new iPhones. Right, these little pocket computers with vast amounts of history and knowledge. But it doesn't work, because these purges jump all over the world. They could be in Korea and then in Spain within a very short time. And it's unlikely a single stone could have managed that. Plus all the May are generally positive, even if they're used in sort of dark ways. They were created by a culture of science, and their purpose is to educate, to invent the cotton gin or concrete for the Romans and so on. So you would have to hypothesize a dark May, something shattered and twisted, and something that can teleport all over the world. And while, I talk about a lot of mythical stuff, I really do want to keep it grounded in the things I've experienced. In my own experience in the history of this world, I haven't found teleportation. Now, that's not completely true. There are ways to develop stable gateways, say, between planets. The current human colony on Mars is accessed through a stable link that can be created. But these things, they're very high technology and very expensive. And at the moment, at least, I could be wrong on this. At the moment, I don't even recall the Anno using them. I only recall them in very recent history. So for me, teleportation is out simply because I haven't personally experienced it. But a dark entity that lives 100,000 or 500,000 years is not at all off the playing field for me, because I've met lots of them. As a shaman, all of that stuff that you might read in, DC's Lucifer character or Neil Gaiman's Dream, for me, that stuff isn't strange, because as a shaman, I have lived those things and dealt with those things. They're real. So, my next conclusion was, next tested possibility was that if it wasn't the May, maybe it was the Anu themselves. Now keep in mind that the creature that called itself Yahweh was the sort of servant, the submissive male partner of the Ishtar, Astarte, Europa, whatever, all the different names she's used, the goddess. That these two really have been the only ones who've been involved for the last 8,000 years or so. And the thing is that they've gotten more and more crazy, sometimes withdrawing for hundreds of years. When they influence, sometimes it's in a huge chaotic way. Deus Vult, the Yahweh character showing up. Was that him or her? Doesn't matter. Showing up and convincing the Europeans under the guidance of the Pope to take all of their young and healthy people, the leaders of the next generation, put them all on boats and send them, for some insane reason, to Jerusalem to die in droves. For no other reason than perhaps to eventually conquer Jerusalem. Which, what the hell good did that do? Whole generations of potential died in Europe because of Deus Vult. God wills it in this name, conquer, or in this sign, conquer. This is more the way the Yahweh character works. And you see her more in the manipulative and subtle and behind the scenes, like a spider, manipulating people into darkness. So Yahweh created the Roman Catholic Church, and she created the manipulative forces inside to actually run it, and they still fight to this day within that. But they're chaotic and insane and out of control, and this is so astoundingly consistent in its application, in its methodology, in its obsessive focus, trying to find this Constantine character. Somewhere there has been an entity pulling out its metaphorical hair, going absolutely insane, because it can be sure that this Constantine is in a village. It can watch that village from above and make sure nobody escapes. It can have every person in there tortured and killed, but still, the Constantine shows up in the next village over. It's just going nuts. I think this character would have to be a meta character, that is, one not wearing a physical body. A strictly meta character. I think it would not be able to be any of the ones like you might have met, because those are generally connected to a place. This would have to somehow be above the world, looking down. A watcher, an Elohim. This character, or this group of characters, would have to be something like that. Meta characters without a body, things that live hundreds of thousands of years, things that float above the world and watch it, but can still get in and influence people's dreams. And the one group I find, thanks to your little friend, that really fits the bill is the bird tribes. What if way, way back when, not recently as we might have suggested, but 500,000 years ago or 250,000 years ago, that the bird tribes began to be corrupted by the shadow. They began to fear the shadow, and maybe even an effort to fight shadow. They tried to control. And so as humans then came onto the scene, as the Anu came onto the scene, as vast technological development began to occur, whole races were brought up and then eradicated over and over and over. They felt totally out of control. Yes? And for the last, I don't know, I'll just guess completely and say 37,000 years, when things have been sort of consistently stable. There have been meddling in places, but never destruction of the entire species and so on. And a movement slowly towards today's level of technology and such. That these people, these watchers, this Force X, as it began to be more stable, began to understand all of the pieces on the chessboard. Here's what the Anu do. Here's what the Yahweh, here's what his Asherah does. Here, these entities that watch over these dark things, here's what they do. These silent watchers, here's the effect they have. And over 500,000 years of study, they developed an awareness of all the players. And they could say, we'll just move this pawn here. And we'll make this happen. Until they found that there was a joker in their chess game. Now by joker, I mean the wild card in a deck of cards. A card based on the tarot's the Fool. That if you've played many card games, the joker can play any role. The joker's a wild card. It blows away all kinds of things. Chess doesn't have wild cards. Every piece is visible. And they looked at this world, the larger world, as a kind of chessboard and understood all the players and all the pawns and all the knights and the kings. And yet, they began to sense the wild card. They would set up all their pawns in a perfect order, and then they would fail. The queen's gambit wouldn't work. Over and over and over, and they found it failing in the same way, with the same energy signature every time, and they said there's a player we don't know. And in studying, they found that player was connected to humanity, and they found the people developing this Constantine myth, this Constantine who lives, perhaps since the world itself was born, he's been here, living among humans. And in some places he's the light bringer, in some places he's the protector, in some places he's the warrior. Right? But they found this myth, and they began to suspect there was something to it. And they started to hunt for this Constantine. And to create the many purges I started out talking of. And so, my suggestion to you is, I know, it sounds crazy. That's all sorts of crazy shit. I don't mind. I'm good with sounding crazy. In fact, I'm getting to be a real expert at sounding crazy. My suggestion is that the bird tribes, these meta-watchers who've watched over your world to guard and protect for 1,000,000 years and more, have gotten corrupted by the shadow that has owned this part of what is, and have turned into evil things. Your particular guardians of the galaxy were dark guardians. And that many of them still lied to themselves and told them they were doing God's work. They were doing good things. But they were doing it by torturing and killing and eliminating. And then a subset of those guardians became the one or the ones hunting this Constantine. And that they are responsible for a huge number of the massive purges that have happened in human history. And those purges, they have all been in the search for the Constantine.